Hi there, Cosmic Family. My name is Elial, and today, early morning, April 15th, Mercury entered Aries. In some other places here in Argentina was today, but in some other places could have been yesterday, April 14th. It is going to stay in here until May 2nd, and well, I have the sensation that this passage is quite quick, in an Aryan style. Some people already know, but Mercury rules the function of our mental processes. And here in Aries, our mental focus could obtain great direction, or we could start to generate this clarity. The transit of Mercury in this sign could collaborate specifically with this because the previous sign, which is Pisces, in here, it is not annulled that capacity. People that have Mercury in Pisces in their natal charts, they don't necessarily lack capacity of direction, but there could be much more tendency to make this symbiosis with emotional aspects, desires, dreams, imaginations, that of course it is very important to make a discernment of what has a truly function for our path. And precisely the entrance in Aries, it is the invitation to the focus, the movement, the decision, or the communication that can actually open the path. What happens it is that as Mercury enters in from 0 minutes of its entrance in a contact with Neptune and Saturn in Aries. Unlike Mars, on April of the last year, 2025, Mercury made a contact during the first entrance of Neptune before the final cycle in Pisces. But right now, Neptune, it is in its definite transit in Aries, and there could be some experiences of that moment linked with manifestations of right now, of the present moment. But it is the first time that Mercury is going to have an encounter with Saturn in Aries. This is going to be perfected the next week, April 20th, but we are feeling all of this together because Mars has this encounter with Saturn on April 19th, and the aspects with Mars, we feel them with much anticipation. So this Neptunian force creates this atmosphere of sensitivity to the energy that is surrounding us. You could be feeling very moved emotionally, dreams with very meaningful messages, because these are phases where the illusory separations between the terrestrial plane and the energetical and spiritual dimensions are diluting. This could also imply that we could be confusing them, or even become chaotic. They could be becoming chaotic. In fact, conjunctions between Mercury and Neptune um, invite a dissolution of forms of thought, which doesn't mean that we have to annul the mind or its functions. Sorry, what I'm trying to say is that we could be invited to this higher listening to our intuition. And if our intuition is in conflict with those mental structures, then we have to dissolve them. But there could also be cases where people are projecting their visions, desires, and dreams, and they could be very attached to them even if they are not in contact with reality. In those cases, we have to return to the more practical effects of the rational quality of the mind. An example of the first case could be a person that recognizes inwards a direction in his or her life. The person knows that they have to start a specific project, but their mental structure could generate this fragmentation or conflict because the person, believes that the project it isn't going to work, to function, or is not fitting to the standards and the structures that the person has acquired as conditionings. Which is more linked with Saturn. So in here, there is a necessary process of surrendering to the inner calling, even if those mental aspects are generating uncertainty. An example of the other case could be a person that recognizes that there is a situation that isn't working anymore, and that staying there is generating a deviation from the true direction that the soul wants to assume. But keeping ourselves attached to the expectations that everything can turn into what we desire in a magical way without us making an effort or a specific change, this is a form of self-deceit very typical of the Neptunian shadow. And all of us, in a greater or lesser level, we are invited to make this process of surrendering to what, the cosmos is proposing to us. And it is just that the actions implied are going to be different according to what we need. I mean, there could be people that they only have to manage what is happening with them inwards. Other shadow of this contact with Neptune in Aries could also imply to seek quick ways or accelerated paths to conquer something that we want, but that at the same time they are representing an escapism of the process that truly helps us to grow, probably because something of that process is not comfortable or is generating rejection. I mean, what happens it is that when we do this kind of choices that involve evasion of what we need to go through to develop maturity, those actions are going to represent a deviation of the path with its consequences. This is not to to make this self-punishment. In fact, the Neptunian vision, it is also proposing compassion towards oneself and towards other people, but this is not confused with lack of healthy boundaries. And it is important to make this registration and to detect when our motivations are not emerging from the most elevated parts of ourselves, because if there is this blinded acting to what energetically we are impulsing, Saturn, it is going to show this, and many times in a very severe way, because those lessons, we don't usually forget them. The thing with Neptune, it is to being able to go through these veils of our own self-deceit. The self-deceit in the end are ways of protecting ourselves from things that are actually hurting, or because we are judging parts of ourselves because we don't like them, and that's why we don't want to recognize them. But at the same time, if we don't do so, there is no real possibility of evolution. This involves the level of intentions. For example, the intention through which we are saying something, which is Mercury. I mean, we could express, I am very committed to my path, but at the time that we have to make a decision that can actually reflect that commitment, perhaps there is no coherence. A person could tell himself or herself that wants to be in communication with other person to know, how she or he is doing in a hypothetical context that relation isn't proposing growth. And actually, that person is doing so because there is another intention behind, or perhaps because there is an escapism of doing their individual process. And what happens in the level of intention, Saturn is also going to manifest it in form of consequences in reality. With consequences, I am not talking of something evil or wrong, just the consequence of our acts. So we could apply this to the level of desires too. If we are desiring something right now till the point that the lack of that is generating suffering, always reminding in here that desire, it is not something that we have to repress nor annul. It is more about identifying but also refine. So if the attachment to the desire is causing inner conflict, perhaps we are desiring that with the intention that the manifestation can resolve in a very it is not a dreamy the word, like a fantasy that can resolve in a fantasy way our something in our reality that is our responsibility to assume. Perhaps because we need to deal with our own emotions, or because we have to deal with other challenges or decisions in other areas of life. Could also this represent people that are positioned in the contrary polarity? I mean, in the fear of acting towards their own desires, the fear of saying, the fear of doing whatever thing they really want to do, because of how other people could perceive that, because of how other people could judge that, or because of the mistakes or the fear of failure that could also present if we are choosing what we really want. And of course, making mistakes is totally inevitable. I mean, we cannot do things 10% of the time right, because that is not human. And later, if we are trying something and then we discover that that is not the way or the form, it is better to discover that in a quick way, so we can redirect our energy in spaces that can actually produce growth. This is for people that have the tendency to this excess of self-limitation. People that know that they are more impulsive. The labor has to be more focused in self-regulation, into make pauses before taking initiatives or evaluating with which purpose they are emitting words and opinions. If they are at the service of something that is actually constructive, or perhaps ego is imbalanced and the intention is just only to be right, to win, or to impose, in the face of somebody else because of their own insecurities. So, well, sorry for my English today. Thank you, everyone. See you in the next video. Ciao, ciao.